Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Ripped from the Headlines. Some of you may have seen the title already. Real Fake Milk is a kosher cheeseburger here. And you're probably thinking to yourself, of course it is. You can have par of meat, you can have par of cheese, and that is correct. However, we're going to look at a new product that has recently been rolled out actually in Israel. That may change that equation and allow us to ask some fundamental questions about how Jewish law views artificial products, as well as how these things can be implemented, and maybe some of the changes as products become more popular, how that might change the halachic status. So let's dive right in. From the Times of Israel back in November, lab-made milk set to start pouring into Israeli dairy aisles and cafes. An Israeli food tech startup says it will start selling its non-dairy, lab-produced milk made from dairy proteins at local supermarkets and retailers early next year, with the product set to start appearing at restaurants within weeks. Remilk, a developer of cultured milk and dairy, said Monday to partner with God Dairies to start putting its products on shelves, bringing cow-free milk, touted as identical to the real thing to Israelis. From January, 3% fat milk and vanilla-flavored milk made with Remilk's non-animal protein and free of lactose, cholesterol, antibiotics, and growth hormones will be sold at supermarket chains under the label New Milk. Remilk's prices are expected to be similar to other alternative milk products, such as soy or almond milk, but Remilk's founders say their products is more like real milk than plant-based products. As Remilk's products are made without real dairy, the products are kosher parov and vegan friendly. I was in Israel a couple of weeks ago, and in fact, so at the coffee shops, you see in the refrigerator, some of this Remilk is now on the shelves. Remilk's proteins are identical to traditional dairy proteins, allowing the creation of dairy products that match cow-produced milk in taste, texture, and functionality. Remilk's co-founder and CTO Ori Kochavi explained. The startup says it recreates the milk proteins by manipulating a single-cell microbe to express a genetically identical protein. The product is then dried into a powder. Remilk's protein can be used in a variety of food products, including milk, ice cream, yogurt, and cream cheese that are free of lactose, cholesterol, antibiotics, and growth hormones. We believe we have reached a level that we can claim it to be the new milk, which is something that required 5 years of developing at an R&D lab and $150 million in investment, Kochavi told the Times of Israel. It foams like regular milk, it tastes like regular milk, it behaves like milk, and whether it is used for cooking or other applications, this is something that you cannot do with other products that are currently available in the alternative dairy market, Kochavi added. So here you have this product, right? It's not soy, it's not almond, it's not non-dairy, it is halachically non-dairy and parov, but it is this new milk with this new fermentation procedure made from milk proteins. Now, some of you are probably thinking in the back of your head, what cow-free milk? What about lab-grown meat, right? Well, so we're going to talk about that, but just note the distinction: cow-free milk, lab-grown meat. It's not cow-free meat. And we're going to now begin tracing some of the halachic ramifications in traditional sources on the subject. Suffice it to say, they didn't have R&D budgets like this in the Talmud, but it does seem like they were thinking about certain aspects of this question. Any reactions, comments, questions before we jump in to some of the sources? Okay. So, first this idea, first, the question has to, the one question the Talmud does deal with, the question to start dealing with is if something is looks not kosher, or maybe has a different origin, does it still, what is its halachic status? Kind of things that are not there, meat that's not meat, right? We think of that now in terms of whether it's proteins or vegetable or the like. So the rabbis in the Talmud had a conversation that's based on things that were produced mishamayim, from heaven. Think about man. right? And I think we may have addressed this in another setting, right? What's the bracha on man? On the manna that falls from heaven, what's the bracha? What's it made out of? What does it taste like? Right? Do you make hamotzi on it? Is it, there was even a suggestion that you say hamotzi lechem min hashamayim, head from the bread from heaven. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells the story of Shimon ben Chalaf, the source number 2, who was walking on the road when lions met him and roared at him. Thereupon he quoted from Tehillim, young lions roar for prey and to beg their food from God, right? In a sense, Hashem, give them something to eat that's not meat. And 2 lumps of flesh descended from heaven. They ate one and left the other. Okay, the lions are satiated and left Rabbi Shimon alone. This he brought to the study hall and propounded, is it fit for food or not? Okay, here's a lump of miraculous flesh-looking substance. Can we eat it? The scholar answered, nothing unfit descends from heaven. How can it not be? Hashem made it. It's got to be good. Right? Rabbi Zera asked, remember, what if something is in the shape of a donkey were to descend? Right? What happens if it looks, donkeys are not kosher? He replied, you hold in Yorah, did they not answer him to that? No unfit thing descends from him. Doesn't matter if it looks kosher or not kosher. If it's divinely supervised, the hashgacha is good enough. So therefore, whatever Hashem creates must be good. Right? This is kind of the the other side of the discussion of the equation of about, they talk about when at the celebratory meal celebrating Mashiach, right? There's a tradition that there will be 2 types of food on the menu. There will be what's called shor habor, which is the meat, or the leviathan, livyasan, the fish. And the question is, the one who is concerned says, "I'll take the fish." Right? You're worried about Hashem's hashgacha. So therefore, here we have the Gemara says, whatever Hashem offers, you don't have to worry about. That is fine. So you have this idea that that it's divinely has a divine imprimatur on it. And here it says it's a lump of flesh, but so we know that it's kosher. But what exactly is this? Does it have the status of meat or not? We don't really have that type of determination here. But if it's something that has a divine imprimatur on it, then you can certainly rely upon it, even if it looks like it's something that shouldn't be, like donkey. So later in the Gemara, Sanhedrin tells a story about Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Hoshaya would spend every Sabbath eve studying the book of creation, the Sefer Yetzirah, by means of which they created a calf and ate it. Okay, so here you have another story of a creation. Here you have not from heaven, but Kabbalistically making some sort of animal, and they would eat it. Okay, now what exactly it is and how we can do it is not something that we necessarily encounter, right? I could tell you, but then I have to kill you. Then like in the story of Gemara Megillah, we could resurrect you because we have all the spiritual powers. But in the real world, we don't have this anymore. But Rabbi Yeshaya Levi Horowitz in the Shnei Luchot HaBrit does, tackle the question of whether or not this was an animal and whether the animal required to be kosher, or in particular, if they made a calf and ate it, well, do they have to slaughter it first? Right? The assumption is this is not like a lump of flesh. It says they made a calf and then they would eat it. So how can you eat it without properly slaughtering it? So he addresses this in his commentary on the Torah and the commentary on Parshas Vayeshev. And Parshas Vayeshev, which was a couple of weeks ago, is where it mentions that Yosef and his brothers did not get along. And the problem was that Yosef brought dibasam ra'a el avihem. Joseph brought the bad actions of his brothers to the father. And what exactly was that bad action? So there's a midrash that the bad action was that they were eating improperly prepared meat. It was Aver min hachai. They were taking a limb out of a live animal. There's a whole discussion exactly why he thought that. And so the Shnei Luchot HaBrit goes off into trying to understand that by mentioning, I've heard about an explanation found in an ancient manuscript. Abraham wrote the Sefer Yetzirah and handed it over to Isaac. Isaac passed it on to Jacob. Jacob passed it to those of his sons who were the most deserving. Those Torah seekers are not supposed to be handed to undeserving. As a result, only the sons of Jacob, fully fledged wives, were given the copies of the book. So there's the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation. same Sefer Yetzirah that the Gemara mentions, the rabbis utilized to create the calf. Since the brothers had access to that information, they may have done the same thing. Maybe they were creating animals. Anything which came into being through this method is not subject to the halacha requiring slaughter, removal of blood, etc., before the animal is fit to be consumed. An animal created in such a way may be eaten while alive. Joseph was not aware of this, hence he thought that he reported his father was a misdemeanor by his brothers. Yosef thought his brothers weren't doing shchita, and he told his father that they were eating animals not slaughtered properly. But guess what? They didn't have to be slaughtered properly because they were animals that came from the Sefer Yetzirah. They were, in a sense, artificial animals, or not unnatural animals at the very least. And so you have this idea that's emerging that halacha, the Jewish tradition, was recognizing the possibility of something that looks like an animal but doesn't have the same halachic status of the animal, and can be, essentially you have meat that doesn't have to be slaughtered because it's not natural meat. Or you have something that looks not kosher, like the donkey that comes from Shemayim, that could be consumed. Now, we're not necessarily having Sefer Yetzirah produced calves, nor lumps of flesh falling from heaven, but there seems to be this idea that there is something which can be, quote unquote, imitation or similar to the main food, and you don't have to employ the same rules. And this is also reflected in a famous Gemara in Chulin, which talks about the fact that the non-kosher tastes that exist, of non-kosher or forbidden substances, have a kosher equivalent. Right? This came up when they talk about the ideas of kind of fake bacon. You're not supposed to eat bacon; it's not kosher. But what about fake? Are we supposed to kind of imitate some of the forbidden tastes? So the Gemara in Chulin mentions that Yalta said to her husband, "Now, as a rule, for any item that the merciful one prohibited to us, he permitted to us a similar item." So there's a few items that are mentioned there. And I guess Yalta was more familiar with the kitchen products and the food products than her husband. It is prohibited to eat pork, but one may eat the brain of the shibuta, which has a similar taste. All right, so the fact that something tastes like pork, as long as it's not pork, doesn't mean that there's something inherently wrong with partaking of these forbidden tastes, smells, and the like, as long as it's done under proper authority. So we end up with this idea that we can have the taste. You can't eat bacon, but you can have fake bacon. We'll see. This doesn't. We'll take this back to some of the more lab-grown or scientific innovations in a moment. But what we are starting to see is that the rabbis did deal with objects that are not both objects that may seem prohibited, but if they're kosher, or they have divine imprimatur, they're acceptable. We see the rabbis saying that you can have something that's cow-like, but does not have the halachic status of a cow because it's not a cow. And you also have the idea that forbidden tastes are not forbidden if they come from permissible sources. Questions, comments? Yeah.
In this about this Gemara and Chulin, so creating fake bacon is different than the brain of a fish that's already exists in the world. That we're not trying to make something we're not trying to be like Goyim by eating something. Right.
The ancillary, just because you could, should you? Now remember, fake bacon is nowhere like pork, right?
Right.
They sell bacon, which is, or they sell bacon that's beef fry. The idea, I think, for the Gemara and Chulin, we're recognizing that in partaking of tastes that are similar, as long as it comes from permissible sources, it's not the taste itself that is problematic. Some of it's a kind of a parallel discussion, and it did emerge when there's some of these, fake bacons were making its way to the market. Some felt that, like you're mentioning, it's a little bit distasteful, pun intended, to have this type of taste on the kosher palate. But it seems that essentially, if it comes from a permitted source, the taste is not forbidden. And we recognize that there's an interest or a desire for the non-kosher tastes, but they should come from permissible sources.
Okay.
I think that that was also part of in terms of the branding of some of the, and I think this came up in some of the items on menus and kosher supervising agencies. They didn't want lamb bacon on the menu because they didn't want the name bacon on the menu. They wanted they wanted to tamp it down a little bit from that type of a level. So one of the products that is mentioned, that Yalta mentioned, that gets further explored, is that they say that the udder, right, the udder of the cow, which has milk passing through it, has the taste of basar b'chalav, milk and meat together, and the udder is permissible. And so the Gemara starts talking about and addressing what about the fact that there's milk inside the udder. So what's the status of that milk? Is it milk? Is it not milk? And it seems that it's not technically milk, but there's still this concern that you can't ignore the fact that it seems as if you're cooking milk and meat together. So look at source number 6. It is taught in a brayso in accordance with the first version of Rav's statement: an udder that one cooked, roasted in its milk, is permitted. By contrast, the stomach of a suckling lamb or calf that one cooked, roasted together with the milk in the stomach, is prohibited. So the brayso explains, what's the distinction between the stomach and the udder? The milk this calf suckled was considered milk the moment it left the mother's teat, and that it was merely collected in the calf's innards. The milk in the stomach was milk. It came from the cow, it entered the calf, and is now milk, and it's now in the stomach. But the milk in the udder is not defined as milk, since it was never collecting the animal's innards from outside, but is found in the flesh. Consequently, this meat of the udder is not prohibited if it is roasted with the milk it contains, although one should still tear it by the rabbinic law ab initio. Ideally, the final word on the udder is that we don't allow taking an udder that has milk in it and cooking it. Ideally, you have to open it up so some of the milk comes out. But if you did cook an udder with the milk inside, it's not considered milk. Why? Because it's not milk until it leaves the udder. It's not considered milk. But there's still this concern that it is that is too close to being milk. So this idea of a kosher cheeseburger being made with udders, I'm not really sure how appetizing it's going to be. Yes, I agree. So it's but there is this idea that it's not milk until it's milk. And so this, with regards to this kind of, how this plays back into the milk that we're talking about. Remember, what we're talking about here, this new product is made out of the milk protein. It's not made out of cells of a cow. It's essentially a chemical process. So therefore, it's completely removed, and that's what makes it different from lab-grown meat. Lab-grown meat is comes from cells of animals. So it originates as an animal. And I think we had that discussion previously, that it seems that if the meat is lab-grown meat coming from cells of an animal, it's coming from the cells of an animal, so it's an animal. Here it's coming from a chemical process, so it's a chemical, it's parv. I just saw the question. The udder is fleishless. Yes, the udder is definitely fleishless. This is part of an animal. The question is, what about the milk inside of it? And so the milk inside of it is not technically meat, but still the rabbi said in practical halacha is you try to empty it of its of whatever that substance is inside of it, milk-like substance, so you don't get too close to being basar b'chalav. So a good summary, source number 7, Rabbi Yehuda Sherpin, is the new alt milk kosher parav, whereas cultivated meat is produced from actual animal cells which remain present, albeit minutely, in the final product. Lab-grown milk is created by inserting a synthetically produced gene into a microbial organism, such as yeast or fungus. No actual cells from a cow are used in the production of the product. So basically, it's completely separated. It's nothing. It's not dairy. What is interesting, though, right, is and he points this out, and when we first encountered this, or something we spoke about. Another consideration noted by both kosher and government organizations is that while these new dairy products are lactose-free and suitable for those who are lactose intolerant, people who are allergic to dairy proteins are likely to react to this new milk as well. This milk is parov, but if you're allergic to dairy, it might trigger your allergy. This raised the question of labeling. From a halachic perspective, the product may be par, but from an allergen perspective, it may still behave like dairy. I think about some of the labeling that we have about products that are sometimes labeled, let's say OUD, but the label says nothing about dairy, right? Especially allergy issues is a significant concern these days. Why is it labeled OUD if it has no dairy? So it has to do with machinery, it has to do with proximity. That's a whole other issue. But in general, if something has no dairy allergies, it can't be dairy. You have dairy equipment, you have other issues, right? That's the famous Oreo conversation, right? Oreos are labeled OUD, but even the OU has discussed that it's only the dairy equipment. So you can serve Oreos after fleishik meal. You just can't crumble Oreos and put them on your chicken, for those who might be tempted. But all of a sudden, here we have something which is absolutely parov, but from an allergy perspective, maybe dairy. So that kind of raises all different issues in terms of thinking about, you go to a restaurant, go to a fleishik restaurant. This day and age should be completely safe for someone with any type of dairy allergies. Now all of a sudden introduce this product, you have a situation, how sensitive the allergies are and how it's utilized could complicate a whole new level of complication, not from a halachic perspective, but from an allergy perspective. Very often those issues are aligned. Here we see them starting to deviate, but it will also relate to, fine, the milk is this, all three, the re-milk is kosher, it's parov, but what about, can you actually cook with it, is now part of a discussion of a whole different halachic area, which kind of emerges from the whole udder discussion, where we saw it's complicated to cook the udder unless you cut it open to remove the milk. What will happen? We have our old friend Morris, right? Our old friend Morris being Maris Ayin. What about the fact that, how does this look if you get, you put on the menu steak sauteed in butter? Butter is new for the fake milk, but how does it work? And this is not, this issue of non-dairy, dairy type stuff is not new, as we'll see. Talmud was dealing with this also. We think almond milk is a new innovation. Almond milk is discussed even in the Talmud, how to handle that with regard to meat was something that the rabbis dealt with. But how does Maris Ayin enter this equation? So Maris Ayin, we know as a concept that's introduced in different places, will concern what people will think. Rabbi Yehuda said that Rav said, source number 8, wherever stages prohibit an action due to the appearance of a prohibition, even the innermost chambers where no one will see it is prohibited. If something is forbidden because of Maris Ayin, you can't even do it in private. So, if we're concerned, let's, kind of jump ahead for a minute. If we're concerned that you can't cook with this re-milk because, people will think maybe it's, you're mixing meat and milk together. Well, wait a second. That means you can't even do it in private. So that, all of a sudden puts a giant damper on the utilization or cooking with this product. However, the fact that the Talmud says this as applied through Jewish law is complicated because Maris Ayin, there are all sorts of twists and turns. As Rabbi Menashe Klein points out, with regards to Maris Ayin, hadvarim misubachim ma'od, very complicated. Kimat ein lahem yesod mugbal ba'poskin. It's very hard to put boundaries on this in terms of application. V'tzarach laza arichus gedolo biragalo requires a lot of investigation and clarification. Ulai gam li'achar arichus lo neitzei midei sfekos, and even after you spend a lot of time trying to figure it out, you may not be able to eliminate all doubts. So, it's one of those. It's complicated, Maris Ayin, because and I think what Rabbi Klein might be referring to is that on the one hand, Maris Ayin, we're worried about people will think. But there's another principle in Jewish law, which is you're supposed to judge people favorably. So if you're supposed to judge people favorably, why would you ever doubt them for doing the wrong thing? And it's kind of talking past each other. And I think that lends to the complexity. So we have certain rules and we have certain guidelines, but we may not be able to have unequivocal paths forward. And that could be how things sometimes change. So, let's talk about a Talmudic precedent of a permissible substance that there was concern over cooking it or using it because of Maris Ayin. And one of those things is discussed in Gemara in Krisos. source number 10, has to do with fish blood, right? The blood of fish is allowed, right? Fish, you can just take, right? You can take it out and you can take a bite out of it. It's not, there's no aver min hachai, limb off the live animal. Fish are kosher as long as they have fins and scales, and you don't have to worry about any organs or blood or the like. We know when it comes to animals, you have to slaughter, you have to remove the blood, soak in salt, etc. But fish blood is technically kosher. So what happens? That fish blood that one collected in your receptacle is prohibited for consumption because it would look as though one is consuming blood of an animal or bird. You got a cup of fish blood. People don't know what's in there, and they see you drinking blood. Can't tell the difference. The Gemara raises an objection from the latter clause of the Brisa cited above that the blood of fish and the blood of grasshoppers are permitted, and this indicates they're ideally it's fully permissible. So if it's permissible, then why should we be concerned about this confusing Maris Ayin situation? So the Gemara says that Brisa is referring to a case where he did not collect the blood in the receptacle, right? So that's the idea. Fish blood is okay, but fish blood, which is in a cup that can be confused with another type of blood, is more complicated. When Rav says prohibited, he's referring to a situation you collected the blood in the receptacle. So rather, Brisa the rules that fish blood is permitted even when it's going to be collected in a receptacle. And when that Brisa starts referring to a case where there were scales in it, you can have a cup of fish blood if there's scales in it, which would seem to indicate it's coming from fish, right? As I don't know anyone would want it, although who knows, maybe it was like, that generation's, weird type of health trick. And when the Brisa is referring to a case where there are scales in, therefore it's clearly fish blood. By contrast, when Rav said that it's prohibited, he was referring to a case where there are no scales in the blood, and therefore it is not evident that it's fish blood. Right? You could maybe also say that if there's a giant sign on the cup that says fish blood, that kind of also obviates. It might be even more clear than trying to find a scale in the cup of fish blood. So, here we have that something is permissible, but we're worried about people thinking it's something that's prohibited. And what obviates the situation is when you can clarify to anyone else that this is the permissible substance. Right? The Gemara is quoted as halacha and Shulchan Aruch in the situation, source number 11. Human blood, if departed from the person's body, is forbidden account of Maris Ayin. So that sometimes, what's the status of human blood? So human blood is not kosher, but if you have blood, human blood, first off, we're not encouraging you to drink it. This is no vampire, issue. But if one bites a loaf of bread with his teeth and finds blood from his teeth on the loaf, you have to wipe it off. But if it's between his teeth, he can suck it. The idea that if someone sees blood on a piece of food, they're not going to know where that blood's from. So you have to wipe it off. But you bite your lip, you don't have to you don't have to remove all the blood. No one's going to know what's going on in your mouth. So we see this kind of public-private distinction emerging. That even if something is allowed, you have to make sure that the onlooker knows what's going on. So this was something that here we have a situation, something that's permissible, since it could be confused as long as you clarify. In the case of the source number 11, the clarification is remove the blood if it's outside the mouth, and if what's going on inside, no one's going to know. So if we move this away from the realm of blood for a minute, and for example, we start talking about non-dairy milk, here we come to the almond case that the rabbis in the Talmud were aware of and Code of Jewish Law addresses. Ramah, source number 12, it is customary to put poultry meat in almond milk, right? So you can take chicken and almond milk, you can cook them together, seeing that such a mixture, even if the milk were real, is only rabbinic, right? The idea of mixing chicken and milk is not a biblical violation. Meat and milk is the biblical violation. Chicken and milk is a rabbinic violation. Rabbinic violations also must be heated. But so therefore, you're allowed to mix the chicken and milk, but you don't have to worry about it being combined. But when it comes to beef, a few almonds must be left in the milk to avoid suspicion. Right. So when there's a Torah violation, you have to leave some sort of distinction. You have to make it clear that the situation is that this is almond milk. If it's chicken and milk, you don't have to worry as much. It's rabbinic, and you're not as worried about Maris Ayin and rabbinic violations. But if it's a potential biblical violation, again, it's not a violation because almond milk is not a problem, but people think you violated something rabbinically, there has to be something left out there to avoid suspicion. Whenever I encounter a halacha relating to chicken and milk together, I always point out that in the Ethiopian Jewish community, chicken and milk were permitted because they did not have this rabbinic tradition, because Ethiopian Jews were separated from the mainstream community early on. I always remember Rabbi Sharon Shalom, who was born in Ethiopia and then moved to Israel, is actually now a rabbi in Kiryat Gat, an Ashkenazi synagogue. He would say, yes, Ethiopian Jews don't have a prohibition against chicken and milk together. They combine chicken and milk. It's very tasty, he would say. So it's like, you got to catch the attention because he knows people that would eat it. Now, practically speaking, when they come to Israel, they rejoin the mainstream and don't, but that was something he always talked about. And of course, I always also like to include that with the fact that Ethiopian Jews, when Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos, they would eat. Because not eating on Yom Kippur that falls on Shabbos is part of the oral tradition. That also the Ethiopians didn't have as strong an oral tradition because they were separated from the mainstream. So I always like to say that the Ethiopian shul should serve chicken parmesan at the Kiddush on Shabbos and Kippur. That would be kind of the combination of all of these things. But we have this need for there to be a heker. It has to be a sin that we have to kind of remove any types of suspicions. All right, so you notice the Ramah is talking about cooking, right? Because remember, if you serve the dish, it's already been cooked. Do you still need to maintain this type of symbol to avoid suspicion? He says if you do it with chicken and milk, you don't have to worry. If you do it with meat and almond milk, you do have to worry, so you have to serve some almonds. So what about some of these things that don't involve necessarily cooking? What about non-dairy creamer? What about being at a fleishik affair and they have coffee and they have a thing of creamer? Does it have to say anything or not? It would seem that on the one hand, there's no cooking taking place. This is not a biblical violation because you're drinking, even if it was dairy, it's after eating meat, and what you're missing is the weight in between, which is, what's the level of that prohibition? But there seems to be kind of a conversation, okay, if we're trying to avoid any suspicion, we have to have symbols to avoid suspicion, is that always the case? And in source 13, Rabbi Chaim ben Aviste points out that he has noticed that sometimes they would serve different things cooked with almond milk. And he talks about seeing it Reisi Bekoshtandina. He sees this in Constantinople. They would have this rice that was cooked with almond milk, and usmachot v'gil nohagin lanichan al shulchan achar achil tafshilei habasar. They would have this type of milk put out on the tables after eating meat as part of the dessert. There seems to be some sort of delicacy that was stuffed with meat, cooked with almond milk. They would do it, but no one said anything, and there was no symbols. He thinks that shouldn't this be a problem? The problem is if you cook it all together, but if you're serving the dairy, the non-dairy, after any type of serving of meat, you don't necessarily have to worry about maris ayin. If you don't have the meat and the milk at the same time, you don't have to worry as much about maris ayin. So all of a sudden, the non-dairy creamer or the almond milk that's being served for the coffee after the main course is not being served with the meat. So therefore, all of a sudden, we don't necessarily have to even have as distinct a symbol, right? And if you kind of trace the trajectory, there seems to be, at some point, if you go back even to, anecdotally, 75, 80 years ago at America catered events, whenever they would serve non-dairy creamer, they would put the container on the table or a note on the table. But over time, that also has fallen by the wayside. And it could be along the lines of what the Knesset Hagolah is saying. It's not being served at the same time. The only time you have a problem is when it's together. But if you're going to have your almond milk after your hamburger, you don't have to worry about maris ayin anymore, because assuming you're talking about someone who's known to serve you kosher. You also have something which emerges from a law in Shulchan Aruch, that part of maris ayin has to be what people expect. And if the non-dairy creamer things that look too much like milk can really be confused for actual milk, then you're worried about it. But if people start to realize that you have non-dairy creamer and that's more common, then you don't have to worry about Marasayan anymore. Part of it is the communal acceptability, the communal norms. So the Shulchan Aruch is talking about the prohibition of mixing wool and linen together. We know that's called shatnez. You can't mix wool and linen together. What can't you mix together? So he says the only time you have is semer recholim ve'elim in tishta. It has to do with wool from sheep or from rams together with linen. But other types of wool, camels, etc., that's okay. But Chachamim asru mipnei marasayin, right? The rabbis forbade because of marasayin. Meshi im tzemer lefi shedom el pishtim. They said you can't mix wool and silk because it's too similar to the linen. V'ha'idna meshi motzui beinenu v'hakol makirim bo. But nowadays, the Shulchan Aruch writing in the 16th century, we all know the difference between silk and linen. And therefore, ein bo mishum marasayin and mutter imatzemi pishtin, where you're allowed to combine. You're allowed to combine the silk. You don't have to worry about shot. So it seems that it's a process. Something that's confusing is a problem. As it becomes more clear and more recognizable to everyone, it's not a problem. And therefore, Rav Moshe Feinstein, talks about this. That once it's very well known, you don't have to worry about marasayin. Right? Marasayin is source number 15. Marasayin rak b'davar shenas zebarofa pam bofen asur is when it's problematic, when it's likely to be or confused with something prohibited. We're worried about marasayin in that case, right? And therefore, even though you're only doing it on occasion, we're worried about marasayin. Talks about the idea that about people who hang their laundry over Shabbos because people don't know that they did it before Shabbos. To do something that everyone knows is allowed, because some people might get confused. Lo asur, it's not a problem. So the fact that some people are less familiar with non-dairy creamers is not a reason why you have to put the almonds on the table or the symbol on the table. And therefore, in particular with almond milk, Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz is already in the 18th century noting, even the shchiach levashel b'chalav shakedim mutam lemod lo chashu l'marasayin klal. Right? It's so common that there's the way of making it this way out of almond milk. You don't have to worry about having a specific symbol when something is prepared with this non-dairy milk. So, and this, has comes full circle to the modern era when Rabbi David Rosenfeld is writing an article on the subject, even today online. Since non-dairy products are so common, margarine, soy milk, rice milk, non-dairy creamer, powered ice cream, etc., there are authorities who feel there's no reason for concern at all. Seeing ice cream or non-dairy creamer served at the end of a meat meal will not lead the average onlooker to assume that meat and milk are being seen together. You keep kosher, you have a meat meal, you serve ice cream, it's obviously harmless. So what about our real fake milk? Right, the real fake milk is absolutely par. Serving it, after for dessert is fine. It's no different than almond milk. But what about cooking with it? Can we get, once they develop the cheese, can you make a cheeseburger out of it? So what seems to be would be the determining factor is this familiarity with it, right? Because nowadays, if I would cook a cheeseburger out of this cheese that comes from this real fake milk, well, on the one hand, you would hopefully assume that I keep kosher, so I'm not going to serve you something not kosher. But once you take a bite at it and you start saying, wait a second, this tastes like cheese and that's meat, you start raising a question. Part of it will relate to how commonly utilized it is. So right now, when it's a brand new, spanking new product, to utilize it the way other non-dairy milks are used, you wouldn't have an issue. But to actually cook with it, remember, we said it's less of a problem one after the other served separately, but it's still that issue. Think back to about cooking meat with almond milk. The Ramah said, if you cook the meat with almond milk, what do you have to do? You have to put almonds on the table. So Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Rimon talks about that in this case, Lachen halacha lamasa hachalav hazeh, in quotes, this milk, umutzarav heim parv, right? They're definitely parv. Definitely can have any products made after with dessert after the meal. What about cooking it together with meat? It has to get more wide use first. Or if you bring out the cheeseburger with the re-milk cheese. To cook with it and serve it, you have to make sure people are aware. The basar ov, let's say you made it out of chicken, you made a serve chicken parmesan. You can probably be more lenient if you don't have a sign. So certainly if you're eating at home, right? We said the Mara sign is a problem even in private, but we already said that cooking chicken with almond milk is less of a problem. And therefore, Rav Rimon feels there's a little bit more leeway on that product. And he says even if at the end of the day, if you didn't, this is still technically a power product, so it can't lead to any type of prohibition. So essentially, Rav Rimon is approaching this the same way we have other quote unquote imitation products, by saying it's okay. Certainly to utilize it the way we utilize other imitation products where we don't necessarily distinguish, differentiate, or note is also okay because it's commonly used that way. But to start using this in terms of cooking it together with meat and chicken, you should still serve it with its packaging appearance or some sort of distinguishing mark. Definitely if it's cooked with meat and even cooked with milk. But if you don't, it's not necessarily a problem. You may have noted in the article, they talk about all the dairy products they'll make out of this milk, but they haven't yet talked about what the timeline is for the cheese to come out. So until then, we might just be stuck with the fake meat or the fake cheese, which I think is interesting. People can share offline which is quote unquote better. Do you want your cheeseburger with the real cheese and the fake meat, or the real meat and the fake cheese? Maybe a topic for a post-share conversation. So we see that this new product, has its is revolutionary. Might create a different type of a taste of real dairy, even though it's real milk, even though it's not milk. But it could have a dairy issue we saw with the allergies, and we see that that rabbinic tradition in Jewish law has dealt with how to handle artificial things that seem like real, that taste like things that are forbidden, and that could be confusing. And we're doing so in a similar fashion. Just before we want to wrap up, I want to mention that this class was sponsored by Aviva Sussman, commemorating the yahrzeit of her mother, Els Prince Solomon Bentheim, as Zichrono Livracha. May the memory be for a blessing and the Neshama have an Aliyah. And we will now open things up for questions and comments.